Bad news, New Orleans Saints fans. It turns out the salary cap is real, but the good news is that it don't matter. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is sponsored by our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Yeah, they're still hanging with us. I absolutely love it. The official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Head over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. I'll tell you more about them later on. But first, on today's episode, who is the team that's in the worst salary cap situation going into 2023? It is an NFC South team, but it's not the New Orleans Saints, no matter what they might tell you. We'll also take a look at how the Saints can free up salary cap space without having to do too terrible much. But first, there will be some tough salary cap decisions that they'll have to make, particularly when it comes to the option to utilize two post-June 1 transactions. So we'll break all that down. That's where we're going to get started today. So the NFL released its 2023 salary cap, $224.8 million. It's up over $16 million from where it was last year. The TV money's starting to roll in. Eventually, that FanDuel money's going to start coming through for the NFL as well. Official sportsbook of the NFL. And all of that is going to end up bolstering the salary cap. So in 2 years, we're probably going to see this NFL salary cap go from the $220 million range to $280 million range. And for the New Orleans Saints, that is excellent news. This is what we've been waiting for in New Orleans. Over $100 million over the salary cap a couple of years ago. $70 million over the salary cap last year. This year, right around $57 or so million over the salary cap. The Saints will roll an additional $1.1 million or so over of unused salary cap from 2022 to 2023. That'll help them out a tiny bit as well. It's basically another veteran minimum contract. That's not a bad place to be. But overall, the Saints are still going to have some work to do, but they won't have to work too hard to get underneath the salary cap to the point to where they can spend. I'm not talking about them just getting to what we would call the black, which would be like at a point to where they can spend. I'm talking about them being like ready to go to spend more money and do all these other things. They'll just have to make some tough decisions along the way in terms of how they want to do it. The toughest decisions, though, aren't necessarily going to be ones that have to do with cutting a player to save money or sacrificing a player that they really like in order to pick up some salary cap space. The tough decision that they have to make here is how much do they want to restructure? You're going to hear a lot of people talk about kicking the can down the road. But when it comes to the progress of salary cap situations, what you're really looking for is if there is a deficit, if there is a debt, is that debt getting smaller and smaller and smaller? You remember we just discussed over $100 million over the salary cap a couple years ago, $70 million over last year, $57 million this year. The debt is getting better when it comes to the New Orleans Saints. And I'm going to show you a graph a little bit later that really puts all of this in perspective as well. But the big decision that the Saints will have to make is whether or not they want to restructure some of the veteran deals for the guys that are 30 plus years old, the Cam Jordans, the DeMario Davises, those guys. Now, I maintain that yes, you do want to restructure those. And part of that is because you want to keep those guys in New Orleans, like especially right now when you're in the midst of like this little bit of a rebuild, retool, relaunch, whatever it is that you want to call it. The next thing is, what do the Saints do in terms of the post-June 1 transaction? So what's going on in the NFL now, post the most recent CBA negotiation, is that every team can make a move, whether it be a trade or a cut, before June 1, but designate that move as if it took place post June 1. The reason why that's important is because post June 1 transactions, so ones that happen June 2nd or later, end up kind of deferring a year. So instead of all of the money accelerating when you release a player that's guaranteed in future years and then you have to pay that bill up front, like let's say that I owed you a quarter a day for the rest of the week, but then I say, you know what, you're done here. So here's the full dollar that I owe you as we move forward, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 25 cents a piece. Instead of me having to pay you a full dollar right now, I could pay you 25 cents now, 25 cents later, or 50 cents now, 50 cents later. I'm only on the hook for half of what I'm doing. That's how the post-June 1 transactions work. So guys like, let's say, Jameis Winston, for instance, who we're not too sure he's going to be in New Orleans next year. We'll see how the offseason goes. He becomes a prime post-June 1 transaction candidate because if you were to just release him outright, you're not really saving any money. But if you make it a post-June 1 transaction, you're saving about $12.8 million because some of that money splits in half, defers into future years. So that's where the Saints have the tougher decisions to make. So if we look at where they can make these tough decisions, the first one is Jameis Winston, right? $12.8 million. It's hard to assume that is a hard decision if things aren't going to go the direction that will lead to Jameis Winston getting another real opportunity in New Orleans, right? So I contend that he is very likely not on the roster in 2023. You've heard me say that over and over again. The money is a big factor and a big reason why. With Jameis Winston being released as a post-June 1 transaction, that immediately takes the Saints from $57 million over the salary cap to $45 million over the salary cap. That's a massive improvement with just one move. The next one is actually a move where the Saints have already saved their 2023 money, and that's in Michael Thomas, right? So there's time to figure out what's going to happen with Michael Thomas. The tricky part is that you are on a very strict time schedule or time limit when it comes to him. And the reason why is because the Saints restructured, or renegotiated rather, his deal at an earlier point this offseason, not too long ago, just ahead of the Week 18 game. And what they did was that they took $15.5 million of his base salary and they converted that to a roster bonus. And what that does is that means that on a specific date, if he's on the roster, money becomes guaranteed for a specific time. So what the Saints did, and just bear with me for a moment as we go through this, is that they saved a bunch of money already just by taking his base salary and knocking it down $15.5 million. It's a good thing for the Saints. That works out. The tricky part is that instead of them taking that money and doing what you would usually hear, which is turning into a signing bonus, they turned it into a roster bonus. So that's what I was discussing earlier in terms of the trigger happening on a certain date. If that player is on the roster, they are owed that money. So they took that money, they moved it to a roster bonus in 2024. The tricky part is that the trigger date for it is in about a month and a half. That date is March 17th of 2023. So that's really the drop dead deadline in terms of making sure that they know what's happening in terms of the future of Michael Thomas and the New Orleans Saints. Are they headed towards a split? Are they not? So if Michael Thomas is on the roster on March 17th of 2023, $31 million becomes guaranteed in 2024. More than that, if he stays on the roster and appears in 4 games, an additional $30 million becomes guaranteed in 2024, per the language in his contract. That's $61 million in 2024 that the Saints would end up committing to Michael Thomas if he stays on the roster and appears in 4 games in 2023. And if you want him to stay on the roster, there's no reason why you wouldn't want him to appear in 4 games in 2023. If you want him to appear in 4 games in 2023, he has to stay on the roster. So that means that if the New Orleans Saints are okay with guaranteeing him $61 million, then they'll move forward with that. Otherwise, they'll have to restructure it, redo the whole deal, renegotiate all of it before that March 17th deadline. So that's really the piece that you're watching. But keep in mind that if the Saints release Michael Thomas and make it a post-June 1 transaction, they don't really save much money this year because they already saved that money when they renegotiated his contract. But they would save an additional $6 million next year in 2024. So they would avoid spending $61 million and then add another 6.8 or so million dollars on top of that in savings. So the 2024 salary cap gets massively lightened by moving on from Michael Thomas ahead of the 2023 season. Those are the 3 tough decisions that the Saints will have to make. Whether or not they're going to maintain, move on, or keep Jameis Winston, what they're going to do with Michael Thomas, and then that earlier piece. How comfortable are they restructuring contracts and proverbially kicking the kicking the can down the road. That's what we're going to break down next. How many contracts would they actually have to restructure if they made these two moves in terms of Michael Thomas and Jameis Winston, and then went on to restructure some contracts? There's a lot of good news here that you should be excited about as a Saints fan. We'll get to that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. In today's episode, brought to you by our friends over at Blue Nile. Valentine's Day is coming up, which means that romance is in the air, at least a little more than usual. I know you keep it romantic all year round, but Valentine's Day is a little bit more romantic. So you don't want to be caught slipping, right? You want to make sure that you've got the perfect gift for your, let's just call them person. And I want to make sure you're going to be able to get that done, because you're going to be able to find jewelry as unique as your partner over at BlueNile.com. Doesn't get any better than that. At BlueNile.com, you can find the perfect piece of jewelry for all of life's special moments, Valentine's Day, all that. But you can also create custom engagement rings. Great season to pop the question. And you can get all of that done in the same place, BlueNile.com. Their diamond prices guaranteed to allow you can go through and you can compare like a bunch of different competitors and all that stuff. So you're always making sure you're getting the best price that's available. And they'll make sure that they either meet or beat that price that you're going to be able to find elsewhere. Every order is insured. It also arrives quickly in discreet packaging, so it doesn't give away the surprise that's inside. And shipping is free, and so are returns. Yeah, I know, that's pretty dope. Right now, you can save up to, hear me out, 50%, 50. I'm not saying 15, 50. 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com to save 50% and get 50% off at BlueNile.com today. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints, it's going to be easy pickings for them when it comes to getting under the salary cap. Let's break down how they're going to get it done. This is going to be the least stressful New Orleans Saints salary cap breakdown I feel like I've done in like 5 years. So we're going to have a lot of fun with this. We appreciate you as always making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also make sure you go and subscribe to the Locked On NFL Draft YouTube page. We're here at the Senior Bowl, hence the new background if you're watching on YouTube. We're here in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. Going to be doing live shows around 9 p.m. Eastern time, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, giving you all of our thoughts on the Senior Bowl prospects that are out here, getting it started, because draft starts in Mobile, and so do we. All right, so let's take a look here at how the New Orleans Saints can free up enough money to start spending money. We're not going to go through and do a whole bunch of stuff here, but I just wanted you to realize kind of how easy this is, because you're eventually going to hear the annual, oh, the Saints are in cap hell and all these other things. They're in so much trouble, yada, yada. It ain't that serious. It ain't that crucial. So what we just discussed was like them having to make these tough decisions about players like Jameis Winston and Michael Thomas. There's a couple of other people to add in that category, right? They could do a post-June 1 transaction with Andrews Pete. They could do a post-June 1 transaction with Cameron Jordan as well. But those guys, to a certain extent, become cheaper to keep than they become to move on from. Just like David Onyemata, just like Marcus Davenport, there are opportunities to just redo those contracts to continue to move forward. But there's also some built-in mechanisms that are already there. And this is something we've seen the New Orleans Saints and Kai Harley start to do here over the course of the recent past. We saw it in Marshawn Lattimore's first contract extension. We saw it in Ryan Ramczyk's contract extension as well. And that's the use of the roster bonus. So I broke down roster bonuses earlier when we were talking about all of the things that the Saints did to Michael Thomas's contract, that after a certain point, if you're on the roster, you're guaranteed this money. Two players right now have considerably sized roster bonuses. The first of which is Eric McCoy. Now, Eric McCoy would be a restructure candidate, but his base salary is already right around $1.09 million, $1.1 million. So you can't really restructure that, because when you restructure somebody and you take their base salary down, you can only go as far as what the vet minimum allows for their tenure within the NFL. So that's as low as it can go for Eric McCoy. But he has a $10 million roster bonus. That's money that's already guaranteed to him, by the way. So that means that the Saints, if they, let's say, do the post June 1 transaction with Jameis Winston, they're hovering then around right about $44 million left to chip away at. Taking a $10 million roster bonus and saying, okay, we're going to convert that into a signing bonus and prorate it over the course of 5 years, means that it takes a $10 million charge in 2023 and knocks it down to a $2 million charge in 2023. That saves $8 million for the New Orleans Saints in that year. So that then takes them from being $44 million of the salary cap to just $36 million of the salary cap. You then go to a guy who is already going to be on the roster next year and is facing a potential suspension, by the way, and has been dealing with injuries and all these other things. And that's Marcus May. Just trying to find the number here. That's Marcus May. He sits with just over $5 million, just under $6 million in his roster bonus. Same thing. You take his at $5.2 million, $5.8 million. You convert that from a roster bonus to a signing bonus. That prorates over the course of the 4 years that's left on his contract. That's $1.45 million per year. You just ended up saving, what would that be? Around $4.4 million. So now you go from being $36 million over the salary cap to just $32 million over the salary cap. You want to get the rest of the way down? You restructure Cameron Jordan's contract, take him from $13.9 million to vet minimum. That saves you, let's just call it $12 million. You take Marshawn Lattimore, who's got $14.5 million. You know he ain't going anywhere. Restructure him, take him down to that same vet minimum. That saves you, let's just call it around $13 million. That is a combined savings with just those two players of $25 million. You know what that means? $7 million left to chip away from. And you could find that by accident on the New Orleans Saints roster. You could find that by accident walking through Mickey Loomis's office. Oh, look, $7 million. Got it. Because if you want to restructure Alvin Kamara, you'll save that. You want to restructure Taysom Hill, you'll save that. You want to restructure Andrews Pete, you'll save that and more. So there's a lot of opportunities here for the New Orleans Saints to just keep the players that aren't going anywhere anytime soon anyway. And I know you might feel a certain way about that when I say Andrews Pete's name and I add that little tag on it. But they can even go so far as to extend a player, keep them in the building, and save money because of what they can do with the new contract structure. David Onyemata is going to be owed about $10.1 million if he's on the roster. That's that same date as Michael Thomas, March 17th of 2023. $10.1 million. So if they take him and extend him, the last time they extended him, it was a 3-year, I believe it was like a $26 million contract. So if you take him and you knock him down from that, you end up being able to sign him, let's say, to a 3-year, let's call it a $16 million contract, right? Just knock it down a little bit. So then you're taking him from a $10 million charge in 2023, and you can structure that contract however you want. You can put him with a base salary of vet minimum. You can give him a big signing bonus on top of it, and then you prorate that out over the course of 3 years, put some void years on it. Let's say that you take on $5 million for David Onyemata. You have halved the price to keep him in New Orleans than you would have paid if he left. It's that simple for the New Orleans Saints. There's a lot of different ways that they can go about. And I know we just ran through a whole bunch of numbers and everything like that. But the bottom line here is that the Saints have every mechanism available to them when it comes to not only freeing up and getting even with the salary cap, but all of those extra little bits and bobs that I mentioned after we got it to $7 million, those loosely all together done around $30 million that they would save beyond that. So it's like another $23 million that they can spend on building out their roster, building out the depth, signing their rookie class, trading for a quarterback if they decide to go that route, signing a quarterback off of the free agent market. It opens up all of the possibilities for what you're hoping for in 2023, which is an improved New Orleans Saints team from a unabashedly disappointing 2022. The Saints are going to be just fine, no matter what they all try to tell you. All right, coming up next, if the Saints aren't in the worst salary cap situation in the NFC South, but the team in the worst salary cap situation is in the NFC South, who is it? I'll answer that question as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in all of America. We are so excited that they have taken the time to partner with us, and we're very excited about our new partnership together. So let me tell you a little bit about how you can take advantage of it, especially if you're new to FanDuel, because it gets even better when you are. And they're already, regardless, new, if whether you've been using it for a long time, whatever, they have all the fun tools that end up making sports betting fun and easy. And right now, if you're new to FanDuel, you can sign up, download FanDuel, and you're going to be able to get a bet on Super Bowl 57 with what they're calling a no sweat first bet. So all you have to do is place your first bet on Super Bowl 57, and you're going to get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win, meaning that there's absolutely no losing for you over at FanDuel with their no sweat first bet. So go ahead and take advantage of this right now. FanDuel Sportsbook, you can download the app. It's fast, it's secure, it's super easy to use, and best of all, you can also get paid out your winnings instantly. That makes it even better. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon and claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a little bit of fun. I think this is fun, taking a look at the salary cap. Y'all know that I'm a nerd. Those of y'all that have been rocking with me for a while. If you haven't rocking with me for a while and you're just now learning that I'm a nerd, hello, nice to meet you. So the New Orleans Saints are not the team that's in the worst salary cap situation, although they have the largest deficit going into 2023. But there is a team in the NFC South that has it worse. I want to bring up this incredible graph that breaks down a couple different things. If you're listening on the podcast side, don't worry, I'll explain this. But basically, the idea behind all of this is that as you look at this graph, you're looking at two different things. On one axis, you're looking at the amount of cap space that's available, right? And then on the other axis, you're looking at the amount of money that can be saved via restructures. If you look up at if you're watching, you can look up at the very top left, your top screen left, and you'll see the New Orleans Saints fleur-de-lis up there. What does this mean? This positioning means that the Saints may only be $57 million over the salary cap going into next year. However, they can create nearly $160 million of new money with restructures. Now, obviously, you're not going to do all that. You see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a very similar situation as the New Orleans Saints, but there's a team that is going to be right around $20 or so million over the salary cap, and they can make about $100 million in salary by restructuring, but there's not a lot of opportunity for them to actually build the money and build the deficit or get rid of the deficit that they need in order to be able to spend money. And they've got a quarterback position to fill, and that is the Carolina Panthers, who just hired Frank Reich so they could get all of this right. Yeah. And we saw this with the Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia Eagles are in a very similar situation going into 2023 or 2022. Clearly, things are going just fine for them, to many Saints fans' dismay. But the Carolina Panthers are actually the team in the NFC South that is in the worst salary cap situation, even though it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New Orleans Saints who have the largest deficits at $55 and $57 million over the cap, respectively, going into 2023. The Carolina Panthers' ability to make money is severely hindered by the fact that their quarterback is out the building in Sam Darnold. And are you just going to turn things over to PJ Walker? No, Baker Mayfield's hanging out in Los Angeles. He's Gucci where he is. So where do the Carolina Panthers end up going? Now, if they get it right, then they get it right? And they'll be okay. Shaq Thompson is really the one guy that allows them to make some good money going into 2023. They could do a post-June 1 transaction, free up, about 8 digits. They could reconstruct this contract, save around $13 million. There's a couple of different things they could do with Shaq Thompson, but outside of that, there's not a lot of options. They have some other veteran guys, DJ Moore, Taylor Moton, but you probably don't want to do too much with them. So you might restructure them, but you're not going to cut them and move on from them to maximize the savings that you could have from them, particularly as post-June 1 transactions. And then they have to answer the quarterback problem. They have to fill out their skill position players. They're going to need to see if they can retain some of their players that are on their way out the door, which could include a Sam Darnold, could include a Deontay Foreman. There's just a lot of trouble right now for the Carolina Panthers, who, like I said, can navigate this and maybe come out on the right side of it. But they, even though they have a lesser deficit than the New Orleans Saints, are in a little bit more trouble than the New Orleans Saints are even close to being in. So that's why I mentioned the salary cap's real, but it doesn't matter because the way that Kai Harley, the way that Mickey Loomis, the way that the New Orleans Saints have prepped themselves for their ability to be able to maneuver down the road, they're going to be okay. And not only are they going to be okay in 2023, they're going to be just fine in 2024, particularly if they don't end up not accidentally, but overcommitting $61 million to Michael Thomas. Especially looking down the road, you get to 2026, and shout out to Brandon Olson of Locked On Gators for helping for actually finding this. The Saints have 18 players that are going to be on contract, right? Big time, air quotes, on contract going into 2026, but only 4 of them have actual salaries attached to them. You've got Ryan Ramczyk at $19 million. You've got Marshall Lattimore at $16.5 million. And then you have the pair of Eric McCoy and Deontay Hardy for some reason, who's got $10 million over the last 2 years of his contract in 2025 and 2026, which he'll never see. I don't know who thought that would be funny and just decided to throw a $10 million base salary at Deontay Hardy in his contract when it came to those the RFA tenders and everything like that. But really good stuff there. And so the Saints are really in line to take control over their salary cap space as quickly as 2023 and are not in any position to fall behind anytime soon. So this is a really, really good time for the New Orleans Saints to continue to restructure, be okay restructuring, and be fine moving down the road because they've got good salary cap space in 2024, good salary cap space in 2025, and moving on. Plus, the salary cap is just going to grow exponentially each year. TV deals, gambling deals, all those other things that are going to end up increasing the NFL salary cap across the league. And it also puts them in a really great position to really focus on hitting on quarterback in the draft. If they can find a way to do that, setting up the way that they're set up here in the future and getting a quarterback that they like. I'm not even talking about a franchise quarterback. I'm talking about a quarterback that they like, that they can build around and that they can get things done with while they're on a rookie deal. The Saints are in a really, really good position moving forward with the salary cap. And that is wild to say because I'm not talking about them having to restructure contracts, moving all the way down. We're almost out of having to talk about that when it comes to the Saints. And that's one of the things that Mickey Loomis said when it came to this offseason. He said he wants to get back into the middle when it comes to the salary cap. And they're very, very close to having already achieved that and then reaping the benefits for the foreseeable future. All right, coming up tomorrow, it'll be our end of day one on Tuesday with Senior Bowl practices. So I'm going to bring you everything that you need to know about the guys that I'm going to have my eyes on, like Jaron Hall, like Max Duggan, like these quarterbacks, like others, Tajay Spears, Roschon Johnson, all these great backs that are going to be able to help out the Saints. We're going to get you our first day's worth of reports on the Senior Bowl practices. So very excited to bring that to you for the Wednesday episode. I appreciate y'all, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. And I want you to also make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL as well, so you get all the news around the world of the NFL. We talked about the salary cap, Luke Braun and I, today. We also broke down look at Kellen Moore heading over to Los Angeles and the San Francisco 49ers. Are they in good shape? Are they in trouble with the Brock Purdy injury going into next season? We broke all that down as well. So if you're interested, go check that out also. Appreciate you as always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please take the time to say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.